Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Monday night Chassidus Shir, Monday night mysticism for the Parsha of Ekev. Tonight, we're going to be looking at a fascinating topic, and that is the topic of Birkas Hamazon, the benching that we say after eating a meal that involves eating bread. It's a mitzvah that we do on a regular basis, which is sourced in this week's Parsha, in a pasuk which we quote in the benching itself, where we say, V'achalta v'savato v'eirachta, you will eat, you will be satisfied, and you will bless as Hashem Elokecha, bless Hashem your God, ala aretz hatoiva asher nasan lach, for the good land that He has given to you. And of course, every part of Torah has deeper and deeper layers. In the literal sense, this is one of the mitzvahs. It's one of only two brachas that we make that are biblically mandated, that are midda oraisa. We make many brachas throughout the day. We make brachas over foods that we eat, known as a bracha rishona. We make brachas before performing mitzvahs. We make brachas on seeing natural phenomena. And we also say Birkas Hamazon and Birkas HaTorah. All of the other brachas that we make, the brachas before performing a mitzvah, the brachas before eating, were established by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. They are rabbinic in origin. But the Birkas HaTorah, the blessings we say before Torah study, and Birkas Hamazon are midda oraisa, biblically required brachas. So that's on the surface level. What we're going to explore tonight is the pnimius. We're going to explain the deeper dimension of benching, of the mitzvah Birkas Hamazon, and we're going to focus particularly on parts of the text of the Birkas Hamazon itself, namely the first and the second bracha. The sources that tonight's shir is based on is a mimer from Likutei Torah, from the Alter Rebbe in Parshas Ekev, on the pasuk V'achalta v'savato v'eirachta, the writings of the Tzemach Tzedek, as well as a discourse from the Alter Rebbe, which is printed in the Siddur Imdach on the section of the benching of the Birkas Hamazon. So, by way of introduction, what is the idea of a bracha? The word bracha, of course, means to bless. But Chassidus gives a deeper explanation that the word bracha also means to draw down. It means a hamshacha. And we find this terminology used in the Mishnah, which discusses a person grafting a vine, hamavrich es ha-gefen, that they would take a vine and they would bring it down into the ground for it to regrow, and then they would produce a second vine from that vine. So the process of drawing down a hamshacha is also alluded to in the lashon of bracha. That's why our knees, for example, are called birkayim, the idea of a berech, that when a person bows down, they do so with their knees. Every time we say a bracha, we are drawing down godly light from above. Indeed, there's an entire section in the Zohar, in this week's parsha, which describes how the terminology of the bracha, how the formula of the bracha alludes to this hamshacha. The word baruch means to draw down, and we are drawing down from a level of godliness that is referred to as ata, you. Just as when we refer to one another, you, we're talking about the essence of the person, so too with the bracha, we are reaching the very essence of godliness, and we are drawing it down through the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is the process of Seder Ishtalshalos, through which godliness comes down into this world, culminating in Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, where that godly light becomes Elokeinu, becomes internalized within ourselves, that it's our God, and from there, Melech HaOlam spreads to become the God of the world, the King of the world. So that's every bracha that we make. Every bracha is this idea of a hamshacha, of drawing down from higher godly levels into the world. And if that's true with every bracha, then more so with regards to benching being a biblical requirement. The word bracha is also related to the word brecha. Brecha means in modern Hebrew a swimming pool, but it means a reservoir. It means there is a collection, because that is indeed the idea of a bracha, that there are godly lights up there in a supernal reservoir, and through the bracha we tap into that brecha, we tap into that source of godly energy, and we are mavrich, we draw that down into our world. And we see this alluded to in the pasuk, which is the source of the mitzvah benching, which says, V'achalta v'savato v'eirachta es Hashem Elokecha. Chassidus explains that the word es, which in the technical sense does not really have a translatable meaning in the Torah, but the word es is made up of the first letter and the last letter of the aleph base, the aleph and the taf. And we know that Hashem created the world ba'asara maimaris. Hashem created the world through the divine speech. And the letters of the Aleph base are the building blocks through which Hashem creates the world. So S, the word S, Aleph to Taf, represents the godliness which is present within the world order to vivify the world. And what we do through a bracha is ubeirachta S. We draw down additional godly light from a higher, loftier space, from that reservoir above, into the Aleph Taf, into the words which vivify the creation, and thereby bring a consciousness and awareness of godliness in the world. In the terminology of Chassidus, what we do is we are drawing down from the light of Sovev Kol Almin, which is transcendent godliness, which is beyond the world, into Memale Kol Almin, into the godliness, into the divine light, which is present within the world. So that's every bracha that we make, particularly with regards to benching. It is about drawing down additional godly light from that supernal reservoir and making our world a more godly place. It gives us a consciousness of Hashem with all of the brachas that we make throughout the day, and it brings an awareness of Hashem to the world. So that's an introduction to the concept of a bracha in general. In order to understand benching, it's important to first explore the makeup of the benching. Benching comprises of 4 brachos, 4 blessings. 3 of them are biblically required, midoraisa, and the 4th blessing is midrabanan, is rabbinic in nature. The first bracha is known as Birkas Hazan, the blessing for the food or for the sustenance that Hashem gives us. And that is the bracha which begins, Baruch Ata Hashem, Hazan es ha'olam kuloi betuvai, that Hashem sustains the entire world with his goodness, with kindness, and with compassion. It concludes, Baruch Ata Hashem, Hazan es hakol. Blessed is Hashem who sustains all. All living beings are sustained by God. The second bracha is Birkas Haaretz, is a blessing for the land of Eretz Yisrael. And that is the bracha which begins, Noida lecha Hashem Elokeinu, and it concludes, Baruch Ata Hashem, Al Haaretz ve'al hamazon, for the land and for the food, for the sustenance. The third biblically required bracha is a bracha for Yerushalayim, and that is the bracha which concludes, Boine beracham of Yerushalayim, Amen. And those 3 are biblically required, and that's why, just parenthetically, that is why we answer Amen at the end of that bracha. As Ashkenazim, we don't answer Amen to any other of our own brachas, but this one we do, in order to separate between the 3 first biblical brachas of the benching, and then the 4th bracha, which is own rabbinic. The 4th bracha is the bracha of Hakel Avinu Malkeinu, and that is known as the bracha of Hatoiv V'Hametiv, where we bless Hashem who is good and who does goodness. This bracha was instituted by the sages, and it's actually connected to today. Today was the 15th day of Av, to celebrate a miracle that took place. After the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, we know that there was a rebellion of the Jewish people led by Bar Kokhba, which at one stage was a very successful rebellion. But eventually that rebellion was put down in the city of Beitar, and it led to the loss of many, many Jewish lives. And to add insult to injury, the Roman governor forbade the bodies from being buried. And for 15 years, the bodies sat there unburied. Eventually, permission was given to bury those bodies. And miraculously, the bodies remained completely intact. They did not decay. And so the sages instituted the bracha of Hatoiv V'Hametiv. We bless Hashem as Hatoiv, the one who is good, for the fact that we were now able to bury the dead of Beitar. V'Hametiv, and he does goodness, to thank Hashem for the miracle that the bodies remained whole and intact. So those are the 4 brachas of the benching. And the Gemara tells us that all of these brachas are derived from the pasuk, which is the source of the mitzvah, or at least the 3 biblical ones. The pasuk says, "V'achalta v'savata uveirachta." You'll eat, you'll be satisfied, and you will bless. That is the first blessing, which is Hazan, the blessing for the sustenance that satisfies us. Ala aretz, the pasuk then says, for the land. That is the Birkas Haaretz. That is the bracha for the land of Eretz Yisrael. Ala aretz ve'al hamazon. And the word hatoiv, ala aretz hatoiva. Hatoiv refers to the city of Yerushalayim and the Beis HaMikdash, and therefore that alludes to the 3rd bracha of the benching. The Gemara tells us something very interesting, and this is brought by the Alter Rebbe in his discourse, that these brachas were composed by different great individuals in their times. Moshe Tiken Birkas Hazan. Moshe Rabbeinu composed the bracha of Hazan es ha'olam, the blessing that we still say to this day, thanking Hashem for the sustenance, at the time that the man fell for the Jewish people in the Midbar. The man which fell from heaven that the Jewish people ate throughout their journey in the desert. When that fell, Moshe Rabbeinu composed the text of the first blessing of the benching. Yehoshua composed the text of the second blessing of the benching when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, and that is the blessing thanking Hashem ala Aretz for the land of Eretz Yisrael. David HaMelech and his son Shlomo HaMelech composed the text of the bracha Boine Berachamav, which is the bracha for Yerushalayim. They would not have said Boine, rebuild Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim was built in their days, but they composed a bracha for the city of Yerushalayim. How do we reconcile this with the fact that all three of these blessings are biblical, and therefore that would mean from Har Sinai, the Jewish people were already saying them? So the Rashba, one of the great Rishonim, explains that the obligation to say a blessing for the food, for the land of Eretz Yisrael, and for the city of Yerushalayim, there was no set formula for how that bracha should be said. And after the Torah was given, everyone would say that bracha in their own way, in their own formula. Moshe Rabbeinu created a fixed formula for the blessing of sustenance when the man fell. Yeshua composed a fixed formula for Eretz Yisrael, for thank you Hashem for the land, when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, and David and Shlomo, and later adapted by the sages of the Mishnah, they composed the bracha for Yerushalayim. That lays the scene for our discussion tonight. Our discussion tonight is going to revolve around the first two brachas. So again, the first bracha is bracha of Hazanes HaOlam, concluding Hazanes HaKol, where we thank Hashem for the sustenance, and this was composed by Moshe Rabbeinu when the man fell from heaven. The second bracha is composed for Yeshua, and primarily that is a bracha al ha'aretz for the land of Eretz Yisrael. But we don't just conclude the blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem al ha'aretz, thank Hashem for the land. We add Ve'al Hamazon, thanking Hashem for, blessing Hashem for the land of Eretz Yisrael, Ve'al Hamazon, and for the food that we eat. And Chassidus asked the question that if we've already said a blessing of Hazanes HaOlam, we've said the first bracha of benching, where we thank Hashem for the sustenance that He gives to us, why do we need to mention the food again in the second bracha, ala aretz, Ve'al Hamazon? It's been covered already by the first bracha. The Gemara asks a similar question, albeit somewhat different, and the Gemara points out that generally speaking, we do not conclude one bracha with two different ideas. We don't mix brachas together. In this case, we're saying a bracha al ha'aretz ve'al hamazon, for the land and for the food that we eat. So the answer that the Gemara gives is that essentially this is one bracha. Eretz demafka mazon. We're talking about the land that gives forth food. So therefore, it's really one bracha. Based on that, the Alter Rebbe explains that the first bracha, where we mention Hazanes HaOlam, Hashem sustains Hazanes HaKol, and the second bracha, where we mention Al Aretz Ve'al Hamazon, is talking about two different breads. Bread being the primary sustenance of the Jewish people, of any man. The first bracha, as we said, was composed by Moshe Rabbeinu when the man fell from heaven. So the first bracha is a bracha thanking Hashem or blessing Hashem for providing lechem min hashamayim, bread from the heaven. The second bracha, when we mention the land of Eretz Yisrael and conclude ala aretz ve'al hamazon, we are talking about the eretz demafka mazon. We're talking about the bread that is produced from the land, earthly bread. Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. What's the difference between them? Is that the man was a godly revelation from above. It was a very spiritual type of food that was provided to the Jewish people in the Midbar, and they had to put in very little to no effort at all in procuring and preparing that food. Masha Ein Kain, when they entered into Eretz Yisrael with Yehoshua, and the man stopped, they now needed to go and produce the bread from the earth with all of the various malachas that it entails, starting with plowing the field and planting the field and reaping and winnowing and sifting, etc., until finally they could knead and bake the dough. That's the difference between the two. That lechem min hashamayim comes from above to below, with little to no effort on our part. whereas lechem min haaretz is entirely through our own efforts down here in this world. And that is the difference between the Jewish people in the desert with Moshe Rabbeinu, where everything they had was miraculously provided. Their man from heaven, the water that they drank, the clothing that grew with them, the clouds of glory that protected them and fought their wars for them. Whereas when they entered into Eretz Yisrael with Yeshua, they now needed to start to engage with the world within the natural order. And therefore, their bread required them to engage with the physicality of the world. When we talk about the difference between the lechem min hashamayim, the man, and lechem min haaretz in terms of avodah. So what is the purpose of our eating bread? What is the purpose? And bread is really just a generalization for all of our engagements with the physicality of the world. One of the concepts which is discussed extensively in the writings of Kabbalah is the idea of birurim, refining the godly sparks within our world. Not to go into the entire background, but Kabbalah explains that as part of the evolvement of our world, there was, so to speak, a spiritual implosion from the higher worlds, which caused godly sparks of light to become implanted, embedded into the physicality of our world. And everything in this physical world has a spark of godliness within it. But the physicality itself conceals over that godly spark. And as a Jew, our mission in this world is avodas habirurim, the idea of refining and elevating these sparks. And it happens through every time we engage with the physical world with a kavana l'shem shamayim, with our intention that we are doing so for the sake of heaven. It could be, nowadays we're not farmers, so it could be our engagement in parnasa, in work, in whatever profession we do. It is also in our engagement with eating and drinking, recreation, any type of physical activity that we do. When we do so with a kavanah and intention, l'shem shamayim, to serve Hashem, to have strength to serve Hashem, to be healthy to serve Hashem, and the like, we refine and elevate that spark. That is the avodah of birurim. But that only applies with lechem min haaretz, the bread that we need to engage with the physicality of the world, to farm the land, to produce, to winnow, to plow, to harvest, etc. That is the avodah of birurim. That is the avodah milmata lamayla, where we engage with the aretz, we engage with the earth to produce lechem, to produce sustenance, and thereby elevate those godly sparks back to their source. But that is because the physicality of the bread comes from klippas noiga. It comes from a source which conceals the divine light. But the man did not require any refining whatsoever. The man was a revelation of godliness. It is referred to as the lechem abirim. It's the food that sustains the angels. It's the food which it nourishes spiritual beings, and therefore does not have any physicality to us. And that's why, interesting enough, the man did not produce any waste product. The food that we eat produces a waste product, which alludes to the idea of birurim, where the choice nutrients of the food becomes absorbed into our bodies to give us energy and strength to serve Hashem. And the residual, the waste, that negative aspect becomes discarded. But the man, there was no waste product whatsoever, because the man was completely refined. It was completely sublime. It was completely godly, and therefore did not need any refinement whatsoever. So whereas the lechem min haaretz, the bread of the earth, means engaging within the physical world in order to refine the godly sparks, the man, however, was not about refining, but it was about having godly revelation from above to below. So that's the difference between these first two brachas. The first bracha, composed by Moshe Rabbeinu in that desert type of environment where they ate the man, was for the lechem min hashamayim, which comes from a lofty godly source. Whereas the second bracha, composed by Yeshua, when they would now enter and have to engage with the land, with the earth, was about lechem min haaretz, the bread that is produced from the earth, which is through our efforts in order to refine the physicality of the world and to elevate these divine sparks. To take this idea a little bit further, one of the mitzvahs came up in last week's parsha is Achdus Hashem, the unity of Hashem. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And it does not just mean that Hashem is one and not any more than one, God forbid, but on a deeper level, Kabbalah explains, and the Rambam brings this as well, is that it means that Hashem is absolute oneness. And when we talk about the oneness of Hashem, Chassidus talks about two different levels of yichud. There is what is known as yichuda ilah, a higher level of unity of Hashem, and Yechuda Tata, a lower level of the unity of Hashem. What do these mean? Yechuda Ilah, the higher level of unity of Hashem, is the idea that nothing else exists other than Hashem alone. As we read in last week's parsha, Ein Oid Milvadoi. There is nothing else besides Hashem. And what that means is, whilst we look at our world and see a reality, we see a physical reality in which we live, that world is completely batul to Hashem. It is completely nullified to Hashem because it is completely dependent on Hashem for its existence, and therefore, were Hashem to withdraw it, it would cease to be. And therefore, in essence, there is nothing else besides Hashem. In contrast, Yechuda Tata is the recognition that the world does exist. There is a reality of the world in which we live, but we surrender ourselves to Hashem and His service, and this world exists in order to serve Hashem. This can be encapsulated in slightly different terms, in terms of Yira. Yira is the mitzvah of fearing Hashem, of having awe of Hashem. A lower level of Yira is known as, or bittul, is bittul hayesh. That means I surrender my sense of self, my sense of independence to Hashem. That I have my own desires, my own wishes, but I defer that, or as Chazal say in Pirkei Avos, that you have to surrender your will before Hashem's will. So I'm surrendering not my entire being. I exist as an independent being, but I'm surrendering my yeshus. I'm surrendering my sense of self, my desires, my ego, my yeshus. But the higher level of bittul is bittul b'metzius. It's the recognition that nothing else exists other than Hashem, and that everything exists only as an extension of Hashem. What's the difference between these? The best way to explain this is by way of a parable. You have subjects of a king, and the subjects of a king live in the king's empire, and they surrender themselves to fulfill the laws of the king. But each one of them exists independently, and they go about their lives, but they defer themselves to obey the laws of the king. But when that same subject is in the presence of the king, and the king is manifest in their presence, they lose themselves completely. They become completely silenced. They lose their metzius entirely. With this, we can understand that the higher level of yichud, the recognition that there is nothing else besides Hashem, only occurs when there is a full revelation of Hashem's presence from above. Whereas now, the world in which we live in, the physicality of the world, where godliness is hidden, and we don't see how the world is completely godly, we cannot attain that higher level of surrender to Hashem where nothing else exists other than Hashem. We can only have the bittul hayesh, we can only have that level, lower level, where we defer ourselves to Hashem. So the higher level of yichud takes place when there's godly revelation from above. The lower level of yichud, or subservience to Hashem, comes from the perspective that there is a worldly reality with which we engage, but we surrender ourselves to engage with that physicality for the service of Hashem. And therefore, these two levels of yichud correspond to the two types of bread. There's the man, which is godly revelation from above, and then there is the food from below. And the way that this can actually be brought out is that when we engage in the world to earn our parnasa, which is like the lechem min haaretz, there is the danger or risk that a person may feel, like the parasha says, that it is all through our own efforts, it is all through our own doings. Because we live in a world where we see the physicality of the world, we see the investment that we make, we see the output that comes, and it's very easy to attribute this to the order of nature. We put in the effort, we reap the results. Whereas the lechem min hashamayim, there was no such delusion. It was absolutely clear that the parnasa came entirely from Hashem. And the truth is, that's how it is now. But we don't perceive that because it's hidden. The higher level of yichud is open realization that there is nothing other than Hashem, and that everything is from Hashem, and that is associated with the man, and that was the experience of the Jewish people in the desert. To take this idea a little bit further, let's look at the composers of these two brachas. The first bracha was composed by Moshe Rabbeinu. The second bracha was composed by Yehoshua, his disciple. Moshe is associated with the Sphira of Chachma, And the sphere of Chachma is about absolute bittul. In fact, the word Chachma has the word ma in it. What is it? Meaning it is nothing. Everything is nothing compared to Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu said the same thing. Moshe and Aaron said, "V'nachnu ma." We are what? What are we? We are completely insignificant. We are completely nullified in the presence of Hashem. And therefore, Moshe represents this perspective of this way of living of absolute surrender to Hashem. And that's like the man, the recognition that everything is from Hashem in an open and clear way. Whereas Yehoshua in Chassidus is connected to Shem Ban. What is Ban? Ban represents godliness the way it is hidden within the world, which is like the lechem min haaretz, the bracha that Hashem gives us to our parnasa, the way it is hidden within the veil of nature. And that is associated with Yehoshua. In terms of the relationship of Moshe and Yehoshua, our sages tell us the pnei Moshe, that the face of Moshe is like the pnei hachama, like the face of the sun. Moshe was like the sunlight, whereas Yehoshua, the disciple of Moshe, was kepnei halavana, was like the face of the moon. The relationship of sun and moon is that the sun is a generator of light. The moon does not have any of its own light. The moon is a receiver of the light of the sun. The sun, as the pasuk says, shemesh havaya. The sun represents the revelation of godliness in an open way. Just as the sun radiates a brilliant light from above into our world, so too that is a metaphor for the godly light which shines from above in an open way. Whereas the moon, which lacks its own light, represents the idea of concealment. And in spheres, that corresponds to the sphere of Malchus, that does not have any of its own light, just like the moon does not produce any of its own light as well. And that's the experience of the Jewish people in the desert. It was like Moshe Rabbeinu. They experienced open revelation, sunlight, showering the man in a miraculous way where they saw clearly miracles. They saw the open hand of Hashem. They saw how there is nothing else besides Hashem. Whereas under Yehoshua, when they entered into Eretz Yisrael, it was like the moon. There was no longer this revelation of light. The light was hidden. And instead, it became the avodah of, through our own efforts and working within this world, to try and defer ourselves to Hashem. So that again comes back to the two brachas. The first bracha is lechem min hashamayim, because the man was like a revelation of light from above, like the sun. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. Whereas the lechem min haaretz, where we're engaged with, for all intensive purposes, nature, which is a concealment of God, that is associated with Yehoshua, which is like the moon, which does not produce its own light, where that light is hidden. So if we take this idea a little bit further, the Alter Rebbe says, based on this paradigm, we can understand a couple of nuances in these two brachas. The first bracha of Hazan is what is referred to as Lashon Nistar. In English, we call that the third person. Hazan, he is the one who sustains everything. Hu noisen lechem l'chol basar. He gives food to all living. Whereas the second bracha is in second tense, Lashon Noichach, Noide Lacha, Hashem Elokeinu, Ashin Chata Lavoseinu. Chassidus and Kabbalah talk about two world realities. There is the Alma de Iskasia, the hidden world. That represents godliness which is beyond the world, and therefore we call it hidden because we don't see it, we don't perceive it. Whereas Alma de Iskalia represents a world where the reality of the world is one that we do see. And that is therefore godliness which is hidden within the world to create a reality that we can see. And that's why the first bracha, we talk in third person, because the idea of a third person is we're talking about someone over there, someone that we don't see, someone that we don't know. They're not present in front of us. He provides sustenance to all living. And therefore that is connected to the first bracha, which is the bracha for the man, which is about revelation of godliness, which is beyond the world, which for us is somewhere up there. It's somewhere out there. It's beyond what we perceive. And therefore it's in what's called in Hebrew, Lashon Nistar, the language of that which is hidden. Whereas the second bracha, which is talking about the lechem min haaretz, it's talking about the bread that is produced from the earth. It's talking about engagement within the physicality of the world. There we use the bracha noide lecha in direct sense, in Lashon Noichach, because we are talking about Alma de Iskalia. We're talking about levels of godliness which is hidden within the world, giving rise to a reality that we can actually perceive with our own eyes. So that's a distinction in terms of the terminology or the language of the bracha. A further difference is that the first bracha is in a way of bracha, baruch, ata. The second bracha begins noide lacha. We give thanks or acknowledgement. It comes from the words haida'a. What's the difference between bracha and haidah? So bracha is the idea of something that we are drawing down. Haidah is associated with emunah. Bracha, when you bless something, it's because you have an awareness and understanding of it. Whereas when you have haidah, which means I acknowledge, that means I don't understand, but I defer myself to acknowledge that there is something there. That's the lashon of haidah. The first bracha, we use the word baruch because on that level, it's about open revelation of godliness. And therefore, it's something which is baruch. Whereas the second bracha is hidden. And therefore, we use the lashon noida, haidah, which is like emunah. In fact, we say vemunascha baleilos, nighttime, which is a time of darkness, nighttime, which represents when Hashem's presence is concealed. We don't have understanding of godliness. We have emunascha. We have emunah. Emunah is when you don't understand something, when you don't perceive something. We can only have emunah that is the truth. So too, the second bracha, which is talking about godliness, the way it is hidden within the world, we can only relate to Hashem beyond the world in a way of noida, in a way of haidah, or in a way of emunah. So based on this, we have a number of questions. Again, the first bracha of benching is composed by Moshe Rabbeinu, representing the existence of the Jewish people in the times of the Midbar, where there was open revelation of godliness from above. It's the lechem min hashamayim. It represents the man which is all about revelation from above. It's not about avodas habirurim. It's not about engaging with the physicality ourselves to refine anything. It's about pure, sublime revelation from Hashem with no effort on our part. The second bracha, however, represents our existence within the world where we don't see godliness in an apparent way, where we have to engage with the physicality of the world for the purpose of birurim, to produce the bread that we eat, or to procure all the physical things that we use, and to engage in that for the purpose of birurim, of refining the world. So question number one is, why do we still say the formula of the first bracha? I understand now why we say in the second bracha, ala aretz ve'ala mazoi, because the bread that we eat is the bread that comes from the aretz, ala aretz ve'ala mazoi. But why do we say the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was composed to describe the man, this sublime, open, godly revelation that comes from above, when that is not our experience? That stopped when the Jewish people entered into Eretz Yisrael. The basic answer to that is based on a teaching of the Rebbe Maharash. The Rebbe Maharash said that Parnasa nowadays is like the man. That means that in essence, our Parnasa, whilst we may think comes only through our own efforts, or comes through our own efforts, really our Parnasa is and always has been like the man, which is a gift from us, a gift from Hashem to us from above. But on a deeper level, the Alter Rebbe explains as follows. And I guess primarily, before we get to that, let's go to a second nuance. The second nuance is as follows. In which bracha do we quote the pasuk, V'achalta v'savata uveirachta, which is the source from the Torah of the mitzvah of benching? And as we mentioned earlier, that text, V'achalta v'savata uveirachta Shem Elokecha al haaretz hatoiva, incorporates all of the brachas of the benching. We say that specifically in the second bracha of the benching, which is ala aretz v'ala mazoin, for the land and the bread that comes from the land. And why is that? Seemingly, the first bracha is of a higher order. It's a bracha which is connected to the man. It's talking about revelation of godliness from above, from the sublime level that the man comes from. Whereas the second bracha is talking about where godliness is concealed. And we've got to roll up our sleeves and get involved and engage with the physicality of the world. So why is the pasuk only quoted in the second bracha, not the first? And a second nuance is that in that bracha, we say, Eretz Chemda Toiva Urachava. We refer to Eretz Yisrael as an Eretz Chemda. Chemda means a land of desire, that it's the land of Hashem's desire. The reason for that is that we know, based on the teachings of Chassidus, that the reason for which Hashem created the world was, as the Medrash Tanchuma says, Nisava HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem had a desire for a dira b'tachtonim. Hashem desired to have a dwelling place within the lowest of worlds. And what that means, effectively, when we talk about lower and higher, we're not talking about spatially. We're talking about that in a world which is spiritually lowly, a world where godliness is completely concealed, a world in which we see the physicality of the world and we don't see its godly presence, a world in which we need to engage in the natural order. Hashem wants that to become the dwelling place where his essence is revealed. And that takes place through us. We, who are creatures of this world, of the Tachtonim, make it, transform it through our engagement with it for a godly purpose, make the world into a dwelling place for Hashem. We bring a consciousness of Hashem into ourselves and into the world to make it a holy and godly place. And that means that whilst there might be higher spiritual worlds, the actualization of Hashem's entire desire for the entire creation of the whole world order is for this world. It's for our engagement in this world. And that's why most of the mitzvahs of the Torah are physical mitzvahs, where we use physical objects, because that's how we fulfill God's desire of a dwelling in this world. And the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash, was a prototype for that, where we took physical materials, stone, wood, gold, etc., and we transformed it into a house for Hashem. And so too, we do that with our lives and with our world by engaging with our world in our workspaces. If they're farmers, if you're accountants, you're lawyers, you're teachers, etc., all of the things that we do that are mundane, that's how we make this world into a dwelling place. So when we talk about the desire of Hashem for existence, the chemda, the desire that Hashem had for creation, it was not for the man. It was not for the sublime spiritual worlds from which the man emanates. It was not for the purpose that everything should be gifted to us from on high and we don't have to do any effort and we don't need to engage with the world like the Jewish people in the desert. The kavanah, the intention of Hashem, the chemda, the desire was for the eretz, for the land, for the earth, and having to work to bring forth parnasa from the earth. That's why the Jewish people stay in the desert was temporary. They were only there, and they were supposed to be there for a year or so. Ended up being 40 years, but it was only temporary. The ultimate kavanah was not that they stay there with everything provided miraculously, but they would go into Eretz Yisrael and serve Hashem within the natural order, because that, whilst it seems spiritually lower, there's less revelation, it's harder, it's more difficult, but that is where Hashem's desire is fulfilled. Eretz Chemda Toiva Rechava. That the Eretz, yes, that mundane, lowly world where godliness is concealed, the nature of the world where we could delude ourselves and think that we are generating our parnasa through our own efforts, there is where Hashem's chemda, Hashem's desire is actualized when we do so with a consciousness and awareness of Hashem, that He is the one who is sustaining us, and that with the food that we eat, we have energy in order to serve Him. That's why the pasuk V'achalta v'savato beirachta is said specifically in the second bracha, in the bracha for the land and the bread that is given forth from the land. Because that is the ultimate objective of the mitzvah of benching, about having an awareness of Hashem within the physical world, within the natural order. And that is the ultimate desire of creation. Now, the risk, however, is that when we engage in the physical world, a world where godliness is concealed, a world where we don't see how our parnasa comes from Shamayim, in a world where we could fool ourselves that we have generated and amassed our own wealth through our own acumen, through our own prowess, through our own efforts, the danger is that we get lost in that world. The danger is that we don't fulfill that kavanah, and that instead we live our lives indulging ourselves. We live our lives without an awareness and a consciousness of Hashem. We don't live our lives and engagements in physicality l'shem shamayim. And then, instead of doing the birurim, instead of elevating and refining the physical world to become a dwelling place for Hashem, instead the physical world pulls us down. We get stuck, we get trapped in the pursuit of wealth for its own sake. And then what happens is the neshama becomes drawn down, and instead of elevating those sparks become lowered even further, and the purpose of creation is not actualized. And it's a very difficult thing to do. So on one hand, be involved and invested in the physicality of the world. And we have to do so with our mind and with our actions. We've got to put ourselves into it. And to not get lost in it, to not be drawn after it, is a very challenging thing to do. And therefore, we need what's called a nesinas koyach. We need to have a divine assistance to give us the koyach to then engage with that. The best way to elaborate this is Shabbos. Our main purpose in this world of making a dir b'tachtonim is not achieved on Shabbos, because on Shabbos we disengage from the world. The main fulfillment of a dir b'tachtonim takes place in the Sheishes Yamim Tavoid, in the 6 days that we're engaging with the world, where we're working in the world, performing the lamates malachas that engage the physicality of the world to refine it. But we need to have Shabbos because Shabbos elevates us beyond the world. We lift ourselves to a higher plane. In fact, Shabbos is like the man. It's not about birurim. We instead eat in order to delight in Hashem. But we need to have that to give us the power, to give us the inspiration, to give us the spiritual upliftment, to then go into the world and engage the world and refine it and not to get lost in the world. And in a micro sense, this happens every day. According to Kabbalah, davening every day is like a microcosm of Shabbos. So at the start of each day, we don't go straight into the physicality of the world. We don't just get involved in the nature of the world, which has the risk of bringing us down. We need to fortify ourselves. We need to strengthen ourselves. We need to uplift ourselves. We need to connect ourselves on high. And therefore we daven at the start of the day. And from there, we take the strength that when we go into the world, we can successfully do so with the kavanah l'shem shamayim, to do the avodah birurim, and be successful in fulfilling our mission of making this world a dwelling place for Hashem, to actualize His chemda, to actualize His design. And that is why, says the Alter Rebbe, even though we don't eat from the man, we still say the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu. Our reality is one of Yehuda Tata. We're like Yehoshua. We're in a physical world, which is what's in front of our eyes. Our awareness of God is somewhat vague. We don't see it apparent in front of us. And therefore, our experience is one of Yehuda Tata, where we need to work on surrendering. We sense ourselves as a reality. We sense the world as a reality. And we need to surrender our desires to do what Hashem wants from us, even though it's in a way of Haidah, even though it's not in a way that we understand it, that we perceive it, that we relate to it. It's in a way that we surrender, in a way of emunah, acknowledgement that this is what Hashem wants us to do. In order to do that, we also need to have a glimmer of that experience of Yehuda Elah, represented by the first bracha of the benching, which represents the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, the revelation of the sun. And whilst that's not revealed to us, but the idea of a bracha is a hamshacha, that we draw down some level of that revelation, some level of that awareness that everything else, that everything that exists is Hashem. And that is then what enables us to go into the second bracha, which is a bracha for the land, for the earth that gives forth land, the bracha for the mundane, the bracha for engaging within the physicality of the world, and to do so in a way that will actualize Hashem's desire for creation. So that's why we say the two brachas. That's why we still say the bracha of Moshe Rabbeinu, which talks about the lechem min hashamayim. In the second bracha, we also mention the bris and Torah. We mentioned the bris and we mentioned Torah. Why do we need to do that? Because the first bracha and the second bracha are really two opposites. The lechem min hashamayim and the lechem min haaretz are completely opposite. Lechem min hashamayim is revelation from above. Lechem min haaretz is about effort and working engagement from below. And Chassidus explains that whenever you have the fusing of two opposites together, it only can take place when there is a koyach that is higher than both of them. That is the idea of a bris. Not going into the arichus now, but a bris is a very, very lofty thing. A bris comes from a level of godliness which is completely beyond. That's why it's such an important integral mitzvah. But that is the power that enables us to then engage within the physicality of the world with this godly awareness represented by the first bracha. So let's bring this to a close and really just go through a summary of the ideas that we've spoken about. We spoke about the idea that every bracha is about hamshacha. It's about bringing godliness from beyond the world into the world. Uveirachta es, to bring bracha, additional godly light, into the es, the aleph to taf, the words with which Hashem creates the physical reality. We spoke about the four brachas of the benching, and we're focusing on the first two. The first bracha is hazones hakol, the blessing for the sustenance, for bread, but that refers to the lechem min hashamayim. It was composed by Moshe Rabbeinu. The man fell in the schus of Moshe Rabbeinu. Everything about Moshe Rabbeinu and the experience of the Jewish people in the desert is about Yichudei Elah. It's about revelation of godliness in a miraculous way from above. It's like the light of the sun shining God's presence into the world, where one could not mistake that the world was a concealment of Hashem's presence. One could not mistake that the world was an independent reality whatsoever. And that's the Lechem min Hashamayim. But when Yeshua entered into Eretz Yisrael and the man stopped, there became an entirely new paradigm, and that is Lechem min Haaretz, about engaging within the physical world for the purpose of Birurim, engaging a world where God's presence is hidden, like the moon, which does not generate its own light. That is Yehoshua. And to do so with the Kavanah L'Shem Shamayim in order to elevate from below to above the physicality of the world through our engagements with the world, alluded to in the process of making bread. And whilst we may think that this is somewhat of a lesser level compared to the experience of Moshe and the man in the desert, the benching actually tells us that this is Eretz Chemda, that this is where Hashem's desire for creation is actualized, that this is the ultimate objective. Not that we stay in the desert, not that we have everything showered upon us from on high. That's easy. That's like the angels. That's why the man was the food of angels. But Hashem did not give the Torah to the angel. The purpose of creation is to have man in the Tachtonim, in the lowly world where we need to roll up our sleeves, put in that hard yaka, and to engage with the physicality in a world where godliness is concealed. And for us to do so in a way that we elevate the physicality of the world. That's where Hashem's chemda, that's where Hashem's desire is actualized. And in order to do that, we still need to say the bracha of the man. We still need to tap into, even have an inkling, an awareness that the truth of reality is that there is nothing else besides Hashem. Like the davening that we do every day and the Shabbos that comes once a week. And with that koyach, that strength, we then go into the physicality of the world to actualize the dir b'tachtonim, the dwelling place, through the bread that we eat, and using that as a euphemism for all of our engagements in physicality. And when we do that, once that dir is complete, we will then have completely elevated the entire world, that the world becomes permeated with the awareness of Hashem. And then we'll be zeicha to the coming of Mashiach, when we'll have the Su'udas Leviyasan, a Suda, great banquet. And at that banquet, we will then have the man. We'll no longer have the Lechem min haaretz, but rather then everything will be showered on us on high. As it says that Hashem will remove the sun from its shield and the sunlight will shine in an open way. Then we will have the experience of the Midbar, but in a way that our world has become a keli, a vessel for that, through all of our efforts that we put in and day out throughout our time of Golus. So that's the message to think about every time that we bench. It's a deeper and deeper layer of understanding and a different perspective that gives us meaning for the avodah that we do throughout our day, every day, when we engage within the mundane physicality of the world. And we do so to make a dir lo yisbarech b'tachtonim, a dwelling place for Hashem down here with us in the world, and that the world should be by Yom HaHuyeh Hashem Echad U'Shmai Echad, that Hashem's presence will be fully revealed and manifest in this world. B'mhei Rabbi Yameinu, Amen. Okay, so that concludes the shir for tonight. If anyone has any questions or any insights to